beautiful souls. It is my honor today and my delight to have on the show Mary Reed. Mary Reed was earlier in her life a staunch agnostic until in the year 2000, she started experiencing these inexplicable mystical experiences that were very intense and these states of expanded consciousness. She had no context or background within which to understand what was happening to her. And she struggled and was not really able to find the support that she needed. All of this led her to a suicide attempt, which she survived. And in the aftermath of that, she really gave herself over in surrender to whatever it was happening. As a result of some really extraordinary synchronicities, she was able to go to India and live in the vicinity of the Dalai Lama's community there and participate in that community and come to terms with what was happening in her and to come to terms with her own calling. She since then returned to the United States, has traveled extensively, speaking about her experiences about spiritual awakening and consciousness. And she has authored 4 books on spirituality, including her most recent book, Navigating the Wondrous Holy Shit Show of Awakening. So it is my joy and my delight to have Mary here with us today. Mary, welcome. I'm so glad
Thank
that
you
you
so
could be
much.
here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Patricia. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to speaking with you about this newest book, Navigating the Wondrous Holy Shit Show of Awakening. And we're going to get to the title in just a moment. But to start off, what motivated you to write this book?
Oh, well, I think it was several things. First of all, usually when I write a book, I wake up writing, so it's already starting within me, but I think that that's prompted by some deeper desire that's already going on. And I work with a lot of different people on a regular basis. I do consultations and I have a private community, and I know the stages that everybody's in and all the things that they're going through. I myself have gone through it for 24 years. And just watching everybody be really feel so good when they're held and seen in their struggles and in their confusion, et cetera, et cetera. And I just was realizing that it would be so nice to have a resource where people can see not only their experiences, but the shit show of their awakening, right? Because everybody's having it at in different ways. So I think it was prompted by that, just seeing it on an ongoing basis and thinking, okay, so these are the people that are already having the experiences, but there's a whole lot more coming. And many, 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 many more of the people that are sort of waking up are people that don't have any kind of a spiritual background. They haven't been lifelong seekers. So to have something like this to say, oh, darling, you're not alone. There's a whole lot of people like you. So I think it was born out of that, really.
Yeah, and you yourself had no spiritual background when you started having your experiences.
No, and my first experience was I was agnostic at the time. I was a healthcare executive here in DC, and I didn't have big questions about life. And my very first experience was going into the body and being of Jesus on the cross and understanding the conflict nature of our world and really, really big stuff. And that's how I started. I started from there. And then they just kept being that
Mhm.
profound again and again. And this was before we could jump on and find podcasts that were talking about awakening, or even, the internet really wasn't a thing yet. And so it wasn't like I knew the language of consciousness or any of that. I didn't know what a spiritually transformative experience was. I didn't know anybody like me. So when I was seeking help, I was seeking help through the normal channels back then, which was therapy. And just seeing therapist after therapist after therapist, and then Reiki practitioners and shamans and allopathic doctors, and then back to the therapist. And what I realized and what I found out very quickly is that the therapist didn't have any skills to help someone like me, nor did the allopathic doctors. So, and this is part of the reason why in my book I talk about this as a resource for practitioners as well. I actually have a lot of therapists in my community. I do consultations with therapists, And I know that the struggles that they themselves are having with either they're waking up or they're trying to support people that are waking up. So how can they best do it? And so that's part of the intention of this as well, is I know the struggle of needing to find the help and then the helpers themselves also needing to find help, you know. So this is why
Right.
it's pushing all those buttons there, yeah.
Yeah, so this really is it's a resource not only for people who are experiencing these, and it's I was so happy when I read the manuscript for your book to know that there is now an acronym, STEs.
STE, spiritually
Spiritually
transformative
transformative
experience.
experiences. So it's a resource not only for people who are experiencing those things, but also people who serve or support them, spiritual community leaders,
Mhm.
and also is interesting that you have a section on media, people who are doing sort of what I'm doing, speaking with people about this and really helping them see the vulnerability that people are in sometimes when they're undergoing these experiences. So I think there's a misperception a lot of times that awakening is like, oh, you open your eyes to a world of sunshine and daisies and all is good and happy, end of story. And the title, suggests something quite different, that it's a shit show.
Well, it is wondrous and it is holy, but it's also a shit show. There
Yeah.
are these sunshine and daisy experiences for some people, and a really blessed realization about themselves or life or that sort of stuff. But that's just one moment. And then there's, okay, now what happens after that? And that's the big thing that very few people talk about. People love to talk about the nice stuff, the bliss stuff,
Mhm.
and this goes back to the media. The media often hang that out as kind of a carrot, you know, of inspiration and hope. I'm the channel that you can tune to for, you know, what's coming. And there hasn't been a channel that people turn to go, okay, but I'm really struggling with this. I'm really
Yes.
struggling in my awakening. Where are we talking about that?
Yeah.
Thus the reason I'm so grateful for this interview.
Mm. So talk with us a little bit about those struggles. What and let me just pause and say that not only have you, I mean, you got thrown into the deep end right away,
Mm-hmm.
right into the deep end, and had to try to find your way through that. Um, so what do you find are the struggles that the people that you work with? That's what I was going to say. You've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've sort of mapped the topography of this experience for people. And it's never the same for any two people.
No two experiences are the same. Mm-mm.
Right. But there are commonalities. First of all, there are commonalities in the phenomena that
Mm-hmm.
people experience, and you touch on that in the book. Why don't we start there and just talk about in that STE, that spiritually transformative experiences, what are some of the sort of common themes that people might find themselves experiencing?
Yeah, and let me first say that while I focus the first part of the book on spiritually transformative experience, there's also people that are waking up without these big catapulting events. And I also address that in the book, but I separate them out because they kind of have different challenges. The ones that are waking up without an transformative experience, in some ways, that's a more arduous path. You know, they've been at this for so long and they're really frustrated. They feel like they're changing somehow and they're not sure what's happening. So I just want to clarify that it's not all about the STE experiences, but so to talk about some of the common elements, was that your question? The common elements of general spiritually transformative experiences. It's not unlike what a lot of people talk about in a near-death experience. In fact, it's very similar in some ways, but it's a continuum. You can have that huge, incredible, almost traumatic kind of blast, and you can have little moments of it, and there's a whole wide continuum. But there's the common things that we all know about. There's a light, or there's a tunnel, or there's a meeting with God, or this incredibly ecstatic love, a sense of no time, that sort of stuff. But there's also elements like it's very hyper real. when we have those experiences and we were like, oh my God, this is what's really real. And then we come back into this world, like, oh boy, it feels very tight and constrictive, which is another thing. We have this sense of expansion. There's telepathic communication. There's often a sense of union with or as either that God source entity or presence, rather, or other beings, light beings, or this sort of stuff. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in this book is what people also discover is a piercing sense of humor. And we never talk about spirituality having, humor or playfulness. There's this, what I call the big jolly love. But I've cried so many times just because of a wink from Buddha, or, like it's just pure, that sense of humor. I talk about 19 different elements, but those are kind of the general ones that people have, and the things that are most surprising that when they have all the other another thing that's really interesting and common that a lot of people don't talk about is people can encounter otherworldly sights or sounds or colors or something, and they always say there's nothing like that on earth. And to say it's color is not quite right, or to say it's music is not quite right. And oftentimes whatever that phenomena is also comes with incredible wisdom. It comes with incredible, I love that, incredible understanding and realization. And then it's always so simple. And we all, the moment that we have it, we're like, oh my God, how did I not know it's this simple? And when then we get to see how much our mind complicates things, how much our world complicates things. So there's a whole array of beautiful, diverse kinds of experiences. And even if um, someone says, oh, I too met God and I had this blissful experience, their experience is not the same as that person's blissful experience. There's all of these nuances of difference that are really spectacular, and the way that people talk about them is all different. And anyway, those are sort of the general kind of common elements.
Thank you. And then based on your experience, once again, your personal experience, but also the people that you've worked with, what are some common themes in terms of the challenges?
Oh my God. This is a whole chapter.
Mhm.
And I should mention in the book, it's bulleted and bulleted and bulleted
Mhm.
and bulleted. So I have to creatively use graphics and that sort of stuff to sort of highlight and break things up because it's a lot of information. But it's just because there's a lot of information to be had in awakening that we really don't usually talk about. We usually just focus on the experience and there we go. But in the challenges, the common ones, and perhaps the most challenging ones, first and foremost, is coming back from the experience. Because we have, especially in cases where somebody has a blissful experience of love, and near-death experiencers talk about this all the time. They don't want to come back, and yet they have to come back. It's not their time or whatever. And so, coming from something that feels very free and so home-like and exquisitely easy and loving, and coming back into this world, there's a physical discomfort for some people. I had it in my early days. I used to talk about it like I called it the mystic in the Coke bottle. I felt like I was just squeezed back down into this very tight, rigid, distorted kind of existence. So a lot of people have a depression when they come back because now they have to, now it's like, oh, I have to live in this cruel, hard world and I don't understand what to do. And so there's also depression and despair in the coming back. Depression and despair is a common experience because people feel like they're doing something wrong if they can't get back there, if they can't get that connection again. It's, people start feeling emotionally unstable after that. People also, there's a problem with people chasing the high.
Mhm.
So people will do all kinds of things, drugs and spiritual rituals and all this sort of just seeking and seeking and seeking that high again because it's so extraordinary. I have a friend actually he's taken part with this book, and he had a near-death experience following a drug overdose. And he was so desperate for that high again, for that connection to God, not for the drug high, but the connection to God, that he literally did the exact same thing. He set up the exact level of drugs he took, the exact music that was playing, the exact atmosphere that was going on, trying to get that. And of course, that was not a good idea. But that's an extreme example of the way that people do this. And you hear this a lot with people who do the journeys, ayahuasca and MDMA and these sorts of things. People get a taste of that and then they keep going back and they keep going back. And part of the issue and the problem with that is that they're just constantly inciting energy. They're constantly inciting things, and nothing has a chance to like settle and find its new balance. And so they constantly stay in a state of disruption internally, and then they can't figure out why they don't feel okay, why they feel unstable. And another issue with coming back is that people don't know how to talk about the experience. They call these the realms beyond words because they are. Though, we created language in this separation, limitation ideology, and then we try to describe something that's unitive and limitless. And the moment we begin to talk about it, we've now, distilled it too much. And so not being able to talk about it, not being able to remember all the details because there's so many things that can happen in any experience. And sometimes when people come back from the experience, it's kind of a rolling realization. They remember something else. They remember something else. They remember something else. So there's some frustration in not being able to remember everything and then not being able to articulately describe what happened. But the other thing, which that leads to fear of talking about it, because especially if people are new to this, they're not around people to whom they can speak. And this happens a lot. I'm literally contacted about once a week by somebody who's had a big metaphysical experience and they have nobody to turn to, or they've talked to their friends or their family and they don't want to hear it, or that's something that's made up, or I'm worried about you. I think you're going crazy, that kind of stuff. So the people want to talk about it because there needs to be a cathartic kind of dealing with it, right? Just processing it. And there's not really a lot of pieces or people or places that you can go to. Thus, a really big important part of this is just understanding how to get comfortable with talking about it, when to talk about it, who to talk about it with, and how to find those people, either individuals like therapists or people like me or you, or communities where you can be seen and heard and understood, and you're not considered an outcast. So those are some of the general, more common ones. There's a whole lot more, but those are sort of the most common ones.
Yeah. I could go check, 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 check for myself. Yep, that, yep, that, yep,
Yep.
that. Um, yeah, and right now there are a zillion directions I would love for us to go in all at once, but we are in space time, so I have to make a
Yeah.
choice.
Oh, I also want to mention just one more because this is really common and it was really common with me. It was really a driver of my confusion big time. One of the other most common challenges is what do I do with this?
Yes.
So I have all this really big new information and what do I do with it?
Hmm.
Right? Some people in their experiences are shown that they have special skills, or they realize in the experience suddenly they can, they have psychic skills, or suddenly people can play music. There's all kinds of things that can happen. So I just a few days ago met a woman who now paints. She never painted before in her life, and she said, "I can't not do it. It's just coming and coming and coming." So anyway, but for people that are shown that your job is to love, for example, that's very common. Your purpose is to love. Then the mind will take that and think, okay, so that's what I'm supposed to do. But what does that mean? How do I do be love, right? Like it's a very common, and this was really, really common for me because my experiences started hearing a voice in the summer of 2000 when I was an agnostic healthcare executive in DC. I started hearing a voice deep inside. It was a vibration that said, "You're supposed to be doing something very important," which I thought I already was. So I tried to ignore it, et cetera, et cetera. So for
Yeah.
me, literally the instructions came from the very beginning, a prompt of you're supposed to be doing something. And it took me about fully, truly about 15 years to realize that what I'm supposed to be doing is being the state of love, being the presence of love and guiding and teaching as that, letting that love itself be that which is doing the doing. Right. So that's a very common one. All the time I hear from people about, yeah, but what am I supposed to do with this? And what am I supposed to, which is why, in part, in the section on practitioners, I say there's a whole lot of new practitioners coming to the fore because they want to be in support now to other people that are waking up and they're being called to that kind of thing. But then the question is, so exactly what is that? What does that look like? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do?
Absolutely. That is, yeah, that resonates so deeply. I was on I go on annual spiritual retreat, and one of my practices is to walk the labyrinth. I like to go out to your home state of New Mexico, up in the northern part. And one year when I walked it, I had this sense that your work is important. Like
Mm,
this was after my STE, after these tumultuous experiences that I'd been having. And then the next year, when I went back, the instruction as I was walking the labyrinth was to let go of my work.
mm,
And Mary, I ritualize these things when I get these instructions. I do a ritual to concretize it and to express. That's one of the ways that I express, like, I've gotten the message and my response is this. This is my way of saying yes.
mm,
And I was bereft when I did this ritual where I burned these symbols that I felt were symbols of my work. Not only, at the time I was a pastor, so not only that, but like this broader, deeper work that
mm,
has to do with the world, with the earth, the healing of the world, and burning that symbol, and I was utterly bereft.
mm.
But of course it is that, isn't it? It's the letting go. Like you can't be the love until you've let go of any desire to do something, to be the love.
Yes, or to let go of the human idea of what love is, which is
Exactly.
what we base so much of our strategies on, or our idea of what we're supposed to do, is what the human idea of love is. And that's part of what we're learning. Oh, that's not love. That's not love
Yeah.
at all. We're being called
Right.
to be the state of love.
Yeah.
The being of the energy of love itself. It's not an action upon something, it's the state of being. And therein lies the work itself just flowing, it's love itself doing the work. So
Right.
I can totally understand how that would be that would cause you to be very bereft and also to be exactly the right thing,
Yes.
right? To be there's a kind of freedom that comes with that that
Mhm.
your mind could not have anticipated.
Right. And I understood even then, I understood that somehow what I was doing was letting go of, like you're saying, my personal conception of what the
Yes.
work was, and recognizing that whatever that work is isn't mine to do. It isn't mine to strive for or bring forth through my own effort, that it was something that, as you're saying, it's something that flows through us. I wanted to get to something that you mentioned in your book in terms of the integration process that you identify as it can be a pitfall, that people may want to jump into that step of like doing something or being helpful, being of service before they themselves are ready, before they themselves have really done the deep integration. So, can you speak to that? And can you also let us know how how do we know when we're ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really love that, and it dovetails perfectly on what you were talking about, because it's precisely what you were talking about letting go of the conception of what the work is supposed to be, and letting ourselves be guided internally that what love wants to, express as or do in the world through us, rather than us trying to figure out what it is, especially on the heels of a big metaphysical experience. It's very common for people after they've had an experience to want to go tell people about it, teach people about it, help people, and oftentimes what then is doing that work is ego, wanting to change other people, wanting to be the right one, the special one. That's very common for people. And even when I was writing my book, when I wrote my first book, It took me several years to write my first book because I was trying to write it in an instructive way. Like, here's the wisdom that I've gleaned over these years. And when I would write, I would feel like I was choking. I'd literally feel like I was, but I also felt a need to write. And then one day, I had, I may not remember this exactly right, but I remembered an experience I had of, I think it was Jesus, Mother Teresa, and Gandhi all walking past me saying, "We only did what we knew. We only did what we knew." And I'm like, what does that mean?
Mm.
We only did what we knew. And then I realized the only thing I knew was what happened to me. It wasn't so much about framing all the wisdom. I just knew that I had these experiences. And then that's when the book just started going and going because all I had to do was just write what happened to me. And the wisdom inherent in that was then very, very powerful and energetic. And it just took off. And then the book was done in just a matter of months. So that's an example of how we have an idea of what we're supposed to do. And our mind is doing the only thing that it knows how to do from our conditioned life before. And so sometimes we're filling in the gaps in our understanding with what the mind assumes is correct and what we assume other people will need based on our experiences. And then what we're doing is offering services, A, that may not be that helpful or that really authentic. And B, we're doing things before we're ready, before we fully know all that wants to be expressed as service. And that's the key, is really feeling just like in my own case, oh, this is the thing that wants to be expressed in this way is the experience of these things, not the narration about them, but the experience of the thing. So that's in my own case. Um, the way to know when the time is right is that things become easy. It just feels like the next step. So I said earlier, I wake up writing. I woke up writing this book. I wake up, that's how I know it's the next thing. The next thing I'm doing is a book. The next thing I'm doing is a course. The next thing I'm doing is this. So there's an ease about it. I'm supported in that divinely. This is from my metaphysical experience, from my mystical being. This is what wants to come next. It's not my mind saying, now, I wonder what would be the best thing to do 6 months from now in terms of blah, 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 blah. I never, ever, ever have to think about that. So it's very common for in consultations, people will talk about that desire to do and do, and I can tell that they're, you just need some time to let integrate. And then a year later, they're like, oh, let me tell you what happened. I had the most amazing realization, and then they started being able to read Akashic records or, all kinds of things that happen. So the way that you know is that it feels A, very easy, and B, it's just the next thing happening. It's just the next thing happening that feels like you're being supported and abundant in that.
Mhm. Yeah, there's an organic quality to it. It's
Yes,
not. I think about it as the difference between like a tree that's growing and an architectural design of a building. It's like it's not it we don't have to design it. It's
right.
simply emerging from our being in a very
Yes.
organic and natural way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's exactly right. And the thing is, what happens in the case where you try to do things too soon is that you're just constantly frustrated, and then you're just entrenched in this loop of frustration and confusion. And then not until it's just teaching us that we need to at some point let go, right? Just as you were told to let go of your work, that we need to let go of the idea, and then we're available to the higher guidance. Right?
Yes.
Now, once we surrender, it's like, "Oh, okay, now you can have me.
Yes.
Take me where we
Yes.
wanna go."
There's so much that you're saying that I so resonate with. Um, and one of the things that struck me when I read your first book, Unwitting Mystic, which is the book that you were just talking about, your memoir, is when you were looking for people who could help you and people did not understand what you were experiencing, you eventually connected with a woman who listened to it and was able to confirm that this is an authentic spiritual experience. And her litmus test, and I thought this is what I really want to bring forward, was that everything that you described to her was loving. and that's how we can distinguish between an authentic STE and something that might be, a form of psychosis, which can come, out of fear and the mind's actual, like, fantasizing and fabricating a false reality. But you were experiencing what I think of as reality with a capital R. So the loving nature, that's how we know that it's authentic, right? Because everything that we're experiencing is love.
Yes, exactly. And I should point out, I saw more than 40 practitioners in my 10 years of confusion when I first started out. Um, and generally, they would think that I was hallucinating or I had delusions of grandeur. Some of them believed me and then were intimidated and were nervous to talk to me, or they wanted me to tell their future or explain their life to them. I mean, literally, it was a whole array of things happening. So they didn't have the skills. But the people that thought I was hallucinating or I was crazy or I had some mental disturbance, they clearly didn't have any reference point for dealing with somebody who's having a spiritual awakening. And I just recently have a very dear friend who had a huge, just huge, gigantic blast of awakening in which all of her I identity was stripped away overnight. She just was overtaken with this light. And in the morning, she couldn't hardly talk. And her partner and her boss both thought she was either having a stroke or she'd had a psychotic break. So they were either going to take her to the hospital or they were going to take her to a psychiatric hospital. And she literally had to, go back and forth and then contact me to have them have this validated that this is a spiritual experience. But the difference is, and this is what was explained to me by this therapist, is that she said, everything you talk about is about transcendence and love, and a disturbed mind speaks in terms of fear. And so when which is not to say that you can't have an authentic, spiritually transformative experience that has fear elements. Okay, that's very rare, but occasionally we're just sort of going through a dense layer of fear first before we break through to this sort of higher realms or higher frequency. And so the key is that we do that transcendence, right? We do have that transcendent awareness, that peaceful, calm, loving experience on the back end of that. And also, the another clue is that the fear or paranoia or aggression that if anybody experiences those things, that's a red flag, but also that it continues after the event, that the event itself incited some kind of fear or paranoia or aggression. That's a clear sign that somebody needs to see a professional. And so those are the kinds of things. Also, if there's any history of mental instability, that's also, something to take into consideration. Again, every case is unique, but it's just all the more reason why mental health professionals need to be understanding the full range of things that people like us experience and the difference between what's a true psychotic experience or a mental disturbance and what's a true spiritually transformative experience, and how to support them differently because it is different care for both of those groups of people.
Hmm. Yeah. And as you mentioned before, a lot of people are afraid to speak about their experiences because they might be seen as crazy.
For that very reason. Yeah, I had the
Yeah.
same exact issue, but
Yeah.
I knew that, I was not okay. I was really, in my own experiences, I was just constantly frustrated and, depressed, and I didn't have anywhere to go, and so I knew that I needed help. I knew that I needed help. But the woman we're talking about the therapist who finally helped me, I only found her after a suicide attempt. So it got that bad, that despairing of not being able to find help, failure after failure after failure. So when I say that I understand the challenges that people face, I mean I know the range personally, and then I get, people that are in deep despair or suicidal ideation at least once every 2 weeks from somebody having such severe frustration and confusion. So it's really, really important that we understand the scale of these issues and the need for mental health professionals to be able to discern what's happening within the individuals, which is
Hmm.
why I put the pieces of this book for practitioners after all of the things that they need to understand are going on with somebody that's going to come into their office, that may come in a spiritual crisis. There is such a thing as spiritual crisis.
Yeah. And what word of advice or guidance would you give to people who they may not be professional, therapists or anything like that, but they might know somebody, maybe a family member, maybe a friend who's having these sorts of experiences that they themselves don't understand. How can they be supportive?
Well, I think 2 things. First, read my book. It
Mhm.
will help you understand that this person that you love, that you wanna help, that you're concerned about, is not crazy, and there are other things going on. So, the information in the book can help them ask questions, can help them just meet the person where they are, even just to say, "I see you, and I understand, and I know this may be difficult." So, that's the first thing. And then but the questioning is actually really good to ask questions so that you can learn more, but the other person can begin to talk more about it. That's really, really helpful. And then sit down and watch videos with the other person or find books that are really, um, informing you in new and different ways because your friend isn't going to be the only one that's going to be dealing with this. You're going to be hearing about this more and more and more and more. I have one of the people that gave a book jacket quote that was an advanced reader for this book is in the media, and she's in traditional media. She's here in the DC area, so very activist oriented. She's a lawyer, all about climate and politics and all this sort of stuff. And she had an awakening. And who did she have to talk to but me? There's nobody in her world that she could talk to. And she said, I do believe that the general media needs to know about this because I know from experience that more and more people are having this and are going to have this because I too can feel it and sense it and all this stuff. So there's more and more and more, there's going to be people talking about it and whatever. So there's resources now that people can turn to, podcasts like yours, information on YouTube and social media and all this sort of stuff. So if you have somebody who's going through it, read up on it so you know what's happening and questions to ask, and then just inform yourself, in lots of different resources available.
Mhm. Yes, and you talked about how you've mentioned a couple of times how these experiences are becoming more and more common. That we are collectively this awakening process is accelerating, and more people are having STEs. And I want to now have us just address folks whose process is slower, more gradual, who don't have these dramatic and traumatic experiences. What would you say to those? Because I think when we focus on these dramatic experiences, people can start to feel STE envy, I guess I would say. Although talking about how challenging this can be, that may alleviate some of the envy part.
But
you
that's
know?
actually a very true thing. I hear it all the time when people hear my experiences, and they're constantly, this has been going on now for 24 years when I talk to people. I want what you have. Right? How do I get what you have? Which may sound good, but as you just said, it's not so easy. But at the same time, it's also I think it's a much more arduous kind of process for people that are waking up gradually without experiences because they are feeling that sense of I haven't had any big experience, so what's wrong with me, right? So there's a lot of people questioning that they're doing something wrong or that they're not worthy. That's a very big common one, or that they're just not supposed to have it in this lifetime and they must have just chosen the struggle for whatever reasons, whatever. But there's things that they're learning through that process that are different than people that are having catapulting events like an STE. And so the the ways that people understand that they're waking up through a different process oftentimes are people that have been seekers all their life. They've read every text they can quote all kinds of teachers, but they've never had a metaphysical experience. And what those people begin to realize is that the time has come for them to come out of the intellectual approach and the seeking approach to settle into okay, so what's the experience of those teachings? What's the actual embodied experience? And so those people are finding their way into mystic wisdom communities like mine. I'm sure like yours as well. When there's more of a meditative approach rather than a dialogic approach, right? And so it's less about doctrine and information and more about feeling experience. So they're being guided to come out of their mind, which is where they've been holding all of this beautiful information and letting everything be more experiential. So that piece is happening. But also, people are just realizing that there's something happening in them, that they're waking up to ever deeper awareness of themselves. And it's different. I say this in the book. It's different than maturing out of a relationship or progressing into another level of your job. Something is fundamentally different. And it's the same way when we realize we've come out of childhood and now we have, sort of an adult feeling. Now we're coming out of adulthood and realizing we kind of have a divine sense, but we don't know exactly what that is. And so these kinds of in between and more subtle kinds of things can take people very deep into a reflection of what's really happening here. And that sense of really going in to reflect differently, not on the frustration, but on that sense within, is the very thing that will begin to bring the resources to them that start turning the light bulbs on of, oh, I understand what's happening now. I understand what's happening. And so these are people generally in that in between stage that are feeling like they just don't resonate with their partner anymore a lot of times. They don't resonate with their job or even their career anymore. They literally can't do what they used to do anymore. There's just ways that we're realizing I'm just different, but I don't know exactly what that is yet. Right. So I talk a lot about that in the book, about the ways that we just realize fundamentally something's changed, and how to then take that sense and allow it to kind of become more full. And that's through, different meditation techniques, things that, again, bring us out of the mind and into the feeling experience. And in the book, there's the recommendation of, exploring more mystic wisdom, more experiential teachings, more quiet, silent meditation practices, and not to quiet not to quietly think about our problems. That's what a lot of people usually do, is they want to go into meditation to quietly think about their problems or quietly sit there and think, why am I not doing meditation right? But to have experiences, lots of different practices that can really bring you into a more direct sense of feeling the wisdom within, because that's what all of this is doing. As you know, all of it is just directing us to what's the wisdom within me? Not what I've held up here that other people have said, but what's the experience of wisdom within? And so for the people that are on that journey, this is usually where they end up, is realizing more and more the relief of coming out of the mind.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Here, here. And for me, it's been very much also the move into the heart and
Yeah.
experiencing the heart really as that that visceral, palpable place that I experience union, that I experience
Yes.
communion with the all. And
Exactly.
it's very physical as well as
Yes.
energetic. Um,
Well,
so
if you don't mind, let me just
yeah,
mention
yeah.
on that note. This is a great understanding of the difference. So many years ago, I used to live in a Buddhist nunnery in the Himalayas, which is where I finally, after my suicide attempt, I finally just stopped trying to be normal and surrendered, and that's where the universe took me. But one day in the nunnery, I was contemplating the question of what does it mean to be the light of God? I kept hearing that and I had no idea what it meant. What does that mean? Is that actually a light? Is it just a metaphor? What does that mean? And so I went into a meditation with that question. What does it mean to be the light of God? And pretty soon there were two screens that came up side by side. And one was what it meant to be the light of God from the mind, perspective of the mind. And the other was what it means to be the light of God from the heart. And they were two very different screens. In the mind screen, it was very rudimentary. It was like stick figures, and everything was kind of, very, very basic. And what I understood was that the mind is not the experience. The mind is thinking about what the experience is. So it's constantly trying to recreate based on what it understands. But that's not the experience, that's the about the experience. And then the screen with the heart was so luscious and vibrant and visceral and rich. And this is the actual experience itself. So it was a great understanding of what it means to be the light of God from the heart is the living and the being of the light of God, the vibrant expression and all the aliveness of that and not the aboutness. And this is the challenge when people have studied all of you can study what it is to be the light of God, but you're still just up here in the aboutness of it, trying to
Mhm.
get to the experience of it. So we have to come out of the mind to relax our beautiful mind, and I talk about this too in the book. Our mind is exhausted from this effort. Our mind is so exhausted. So this experience of coming down into more feeling visceral awareness is such a blessed gift for the mind. It's the best, absolute best way possible to care for our exhausted mind.
Beautiful. Yeah, and to put that burden on the mind to get us to the awakened state, it's that the mind can't. It's not the domain of the mind.
Yes.
And
I
it's more
mean,
like what you're describing, the mind can abstract, it can conceptualize, but it isn't the experiential organ, I guess I would say.
yeah, that's right.
Um, Something else I want to mention that I was so glad you mentioned in the book, which is here again, getting back to the STE envy and all of that, that the world would fall apart if everybody woke up on the same day.
Exactly. It
Like
would be such a
we would
mess.
just totally collapse. Like we need people who can keep the trains running, who
Yeah, there
can
are also people that are anchoring. These people are very
absolutely.
powerful anchors
Yes.
for that sort of in between. And while that's true, if somebody said, "Okay, who wants to be an anchor and who wants to be the catapulting?" People would go for the catapulting experience every time. So I
Right.
think people take that as sort of a lesser role. And
Yeah.
on the contrary, it's such an important connecting, grounding sort of role that's being played by people in that slower awakening.
And I think that is a key point to know that they are being of tremendous
Oh
service.
my God, yes,
That
yes, absolutely.
they're supporting this collective awakening by holding things together. One of the things that often comes to my mind is we have a roof deck and I have a lot of plants up there, and one of them is an aster plant, which is a fall blooming plant. But for weeks, it'll be the buds will be forming, it will be just covered with buds. And that one day, one of those is going to pop. It's going to open, it's going to pop. And then the next day, maybe three or four more. And then the next day, more. We, when we approach this from the separated mind, we think, oh, that person's awakening, I'm not. But we're one aster plant.
Yes.
We are one consciousness. We're one plant. And sure, this flowering is happening in different locations at different times, but it's all one thing.
Yep.
And I really just so appreciated how you brought that forth in the book of the vital, vital service that people play who
Mhm.
are, anchoring things, helping us, be the ballast,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
very tumultuous and turbulent experience that we're going through collectively, globally.
Yeah. Well, also just I don't know that I talk about this particular thing in this book, but it's also true that a lot of people that are in that more arduous, sort of deeper awakening in terms of like a prolonged deep frustration or reflection or that sort of thing, they're also people that are often healing something very deep. They're
Yes.
healing something very deeply entrenched, either in their own life or their lineage or something like that. So those people often have something quite profound that they're dealing with that may not be in their conscious awareness yet.
Mm.
So we never quite know. Everybody's different, of course. And in my own consultations, when I do consultations with people, that's often what we begin to explore is, oh, here's this thing that's sitting in your vibrational field
Mhm.
because it's needed a lot more care and love than everything else that's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Mary, I could go on all day. I could I could talk with you all day. However, in the interest of time and you know, it's just time, I think, to wrap up. Is there anything that you would like to say in closing?
Yes, there's a really important part of my book. Um, and I put it in this section after talking about all of the various experiences and before I address practitioners and spiritual leaders. And that is the need to approach spirituality and awakening with a hell of a lot more humor and playfulness and what I call big jolly love. Because in my experience, that is the missing spirit in spirituality. We have been sort of focused so heavily for so long on serious things in spirituality, and none of that fosters in us the innate jolly love that we are from that we come from in the source. And I know this so well, not just in my own life but almost everybody I work with. When they start coming into more divine things, the first thing they say is joy. The first thing they say, oh, this is a joyous bunch, a joyous light, or whatever. And we really don't talk about that very much. So that's, even if you're just reading the book because you're an individual or a family member, I strongly recommend that you keep going into that first part of that section because it's a really powerful reminder of the important part of awakening is that we're awakening to the remembrance of what's innate in us in joyful and playful, and it just makes everything easier, including awakening.
I'm so glad you brought that out because there is a levity in that playful energy, that humor that is so uplifting and opens us up. It dissolves the rigidities of our mind and our
Yes,
expectations. Yeah.
yes. And I think you probably know this, having been a minister previously, is that, so many, I think so many spiritual leaders feel kind of stuck in that heavy, weighty, serious approach, especially those that are coming from a doctrine based
Mm.
um, service. Now to being able to feel, I want to bring all of me to this message and to the pulpit. And my intention is to incite that remembrance and to make big jolly love an innate, integral part of service.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary. Now, for people who want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yep, they can go on lovemaryreed.com, and my books and courses and things are on there, and the public offerings. There's consultations. You can join my community. There's all kinds of things on there.
Great. And people can check out your latest book, Navigating the Wondrous Holy Shit Show of Awakening.
Yeah.
Well, as always, Mary, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for
Yeah.
taking
Thank
the
you so
time.
much, Patricia. I
Till
really
next
appreciate
time.
it.
Be
Good to
well.
see you. Namaste, namaste.
Namaste.